What's going on, everybody? This is the blockchain backer bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we'll be taking a look over here at the Bitcoin price chart along with XRP, along with the altcoin market, and of course, the stock market, as we're in the midst of a massive sell-off happening over there in the stock market. Somehow, crypto has been holding up during all of this, but there do appear to be some serious breaks that are happening over there in the US stock market right now. So we'll take a look at those things. It definitely creates a very fuzzy picture for crypto to see those events happening over there in the stock market. And genuinely, I'm impressed, surprised to see that crypto is holding up during this entire moment. As for things like Bitcoin, still no new lows from last month, still sits there on top of the 50-week moving average. XRP, the story is the same. It still sits there on top of the 2021 high from back here in April of 2021. Total 2, which hasn't done anything impressive, also hasn't taken out the lows from back in early March. But the problems arise when we look over here at the US stock market and what's happening during this event, and whether this is going to be short-lived or if this is a permanent problem. But we can actually see that the things like the Russell 2000 are taking massive dives after this tariff announcement. The last 2 days have just plowed through 1950, now through 1875, before the stock market even opens. We essentially have to see some type of insane bounce come out of this thing by the end of the day, which I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do something like that. I wrote a newsletter just earlier this week and incorporated in AI for things about a rotational top. Incorporated in a lot of the data points that are going on in macro markets, in the stock market, and what it would be looking for in the event of big caps to rotate into small caps, and where would it place in validation levels. And just in the last 24 hours or 36 hours with this whole event unfolding, it's cracking through one by one in validation levels happening here over on the Russell 2000. So if we were to break through 1950, obviously signals that sellers are regaining control. I think we are all aware of that. Breadth is not improving. Breaking below 1875, which we just have in the last couple of minutes, invalidates the entire post-election rally from November of 2024. And it suggests that liquidity is not rotating into small caps at all, which is a major red flag. And should it break below 1795, it's the line in the sand saying that there's not going to be some type of participating, rotating rally happening in there. Again, I'm very impressed to see that crypto is still holding up during all of this, but certainly not a time to lay down the caution with how fast things are unfolding in the stock market, and if that does eventually make its way into crypto. Now, we already know crypto's already gone through a series of liquidation, which was all back in here in February, where we had 10 days that exceeded $500 million and multiple $billion+ days of liquidation. So is it just that we've already caught the brunt of what's happening here? And then you're left with the questions at the same time of, how do you interpret this? How do you interpret what's happening with repositioning in the market? Because you would have to think what's truly happening here is that there's been an entire upend of the global order and the way things are happening here and how capital needs to be allocated. And so we're seeing kind of that phase of complete capital reallocation, uncertainty to the maximum out here. And if you were to just do TA on this stuff of what has happened with this event, it is that it has popped the stock market. One of those things we've looked at a lot has been the NASDAQ 100 technology sector, or the NDXT. We've made many videos on this and live streams about this. I've written about this. I've made tweets about this early in the days of when it was just starting to break out in here and getting going, and that, this is likely the future of what the NDXT is going to end up looking like. That moment was right here. Well, as you can see, this thing has really developed now. We got two tops in here. Notice that has now happened, and it's as if you're kind of right there now for the NDXT. So there sure are the appearances as well, which we've been talking about for weeks now, that the top of the tech bubble is already in. And the top components of the NDXT, or the NASDAQ 100 technology sector, are Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Google, Meta. And that we've now already seen this start to come in here. And well, now here I am. It's very early in the morning. It's still dark outside as I'm trying to record this before the markets end up opening. And China has now announced a 34% retaliatory tariff against the United States. And that, of course, is causing more volatility happening here at the wee hours of the morning. So there's certainly a lot of unknowns happening in this event. I see technical breaks happening in the stock market. This hasn't opened yet, but the NASDAQ went down over 5% yesterday, and this NASDAQ 100 technology sector went down over 7% yesterday. And right now in pre-market, the Nasdaq's down 2.5%. So this thing's probably likely down at least 2.5% once the markets actually do open. And if you caught the video just 5 minutes earlier, and here obviously this stuff had a lot of green on the screen. Now it's shifting over there to red now that we've got all this. But on Bitcoin at least, right? There's no technical breaks happening in here. Structurally, it still looks okay. Just obviously, this is a highly intense moment. Nobody knows the answers on how this thing's going to play out or how out of control this thing is going to end up getting. And when you're living in the moments of these things like this, where the U.S. does one thing, China does another thing, stocks are falling in a straight line, it's hard to know where the bottom will come in here for the stock market because it's definitely just plowing through levels, right? Now, if we just try to keep like a calm head about it, when you're just looking at things like crypto charts, right? Bitcoin, it still just sits on top of its 50-week moving average. If it breaks below its 50-week moving average, right? That's how TA works, right? Rules-based systems. If this, then that. If it definitively cracks through its 50-week moving average, and like here in 2014, those historically mean it's a long, rough road ahead. As of right now, that's not the case. But if it were to happen, you know what's happened before. Like Bitcoin's strength, XRP has still also retained its strength as well. It does still sit on top of that 2021 high, unfaltering from it. Also from the monthly candle closes, it still sits above the highest monthly close, which was back there in December of 2017. The 200-day moving average is creeping up in there. It's at $1.82. And like we mentioned earlier, the altcoin market still holds the lows from a month ago. But definitely a moment in time where outside of some major surprise, it's very clear in the stock market, it is totally risk off right now. And maybe even in the stock market, it's actually reached panic rather than just risk off with the rate at which things are falling. And again, just shocking that crypto is holding up. So there are a tremendous amount of things breaking in the stock market, and that needs to be cautioned in knowing that this is a highly volatile situation. And I spent a lot of time yesterday trying to listen to people and read up on this to see where does it logically make sense. Without there just being at some point some type of big surprise, I'm just kidding. This event is very, very, very complex. And not just complex, but also perplexing to many trying to understand it on how these calculations were done and what the path moving forward is with all this and how this is going to impact the economy and really the world order. So we'll talk about a couple of things really quick, and then we'll get on our way and watch this volatility continue as we wrap up the end of the stock market week here. Things that just do not surprise me is that big tech is topping. That doesn't surprise me at all because I've been writing about that for over 6 months. But I always assumed the very first domino to fall is going to end up being big tech. And that comes from there being an absence of breadth in this market and that it was all consolidated into tech. And whenever there is a massive consolidation of breadth, then eventually that's going to end up topping out. The question is whether or not once this is over, right? If this is not the absolute goblin town moment of the market, but this is actually the big, massive, major profit take that's happening here at the peak as we work out a top up in here, that if that's what this moment is and what I've written about, what I've pointed to, YouTube videos, markets of the morning, right? If this is just this moment, which we've classified it during this whole time, that this is what is happening in here. If that's the case, then things are going to be okay. And if that's the case, it would make logical sense on why cryptos are still holding up. Bitcoin's above its 50-week moving average. XRP is still above its 2021 high. It's above its highest monthly candle closes still. It's above its 200-day moving average. And that this thing could actually end up being over sooner than later. And that this is just capitulation and panic happening here after already coming in for these tests and going in for that final plunge, in which capital is now going to be reallocated as we're now shifting into a new world. And the way things were all allocated a month ago, well, in this new world that we all live in, gets completely reallocated in different places. And I can tell you, in a highly volatile moment where we're talking, this has only been 36 hours, where the market has just gotten massively surprised by something that upends the global order and the economy. And then now we're already seeing China retaliating. Just know, I have not been through this type of situation before. These are just kind of thoughts that are running through my head as we're in the thick of the moment, right? I think big tech has topped. I don't see any way it hasn't topped. Is this the first initial profit taking that's happening here in the markets? We certainly were looking for this type of phase. The big thing, of course, is just the volatility of this moment. And are there serious consequences to what's happening right now? And I don't think we know. Now, of course, you enter into a moment like this and it happens while we get the Bitcoin dominance back at the 702 Fibonacci retracement level, right? We know like in 2020 and 2021, this is actually the level where it did reject from. So of course we hit like this max fear crazy moment happening in markets, and it's happening right as we get here to this retracement level. And that of course leaves me wondering, oh man, are there layers to this that we don't understand where, you know, the story could change very quickly? And I think that's the hard part about it too right now, is you don't know if things can change very quickly or not, because the whole thing, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the first place. So are things so bad that like things suddenly change, right, in typical Trump form, right, and then everything's good again, right? Boy, that's a hard thing to hang your hat on, right? As for gold, hard to know if it has topped yet. If not, man, I bet there's only one leg left. If there even is a leg left, that there would only be one more, which would be the final parabolic move happening in here for gold. That's my bet. That's my guess. If not, already in, right? We've already seen silver take a big nosedive. Silver has gotten pummeled from here, while the dollar, as we all know, rejected from the 702 retracement, and it's just been plunged all the way down to 102. And that's another fascinating dynamic to what's happening in markets right now. Because if we overlay the stock market here on top of this thing, right, you could see how in 2020 and 2021, the dynamics happening here between these two, the dollar falling and the stock market roaring, that same dynamic happens over here in 2017, right? The dollar is falling while the stock market's rising. Look what's happening in here. You have both of them going at the exact same time, which of course creates this very unique dynamic of markets, right? So like even in here, right, here is the dollar just soaring to the upside, right? We all know this from 2022, right? Dollar is just soaring, and the stock market crashing into that moment, right? That's our 2022 bear. Look at that, for them to both be occurring at the same time. So there's weird things at play that are very different from historical norms. And so, you know, I think you're left in a pretty complex scenario in here where I think it's pretty obvious. I think big tech has completely topped. You know, this event has sent the Russell just absolutely plowing to the downside. I mean, just looking at the weekly candle in here, right? We were on top of supports last week, and then now this week just absolutely plowing right through them, all happening there on that Monday announcement and Tuesday, and then here we are Wednesday already. So I think major things to watch for, at least over here in the cryptocurrency market in the coming days, are going to be what's going on over here with Bitcoin in regards to that 50-week moving average, and then XRP just being able to maintain these levels. Probably be a pretty ominous moment if we do see it like fully crack down there through $1.80 and get through the 200-day moving average, because then, you know, we're taking out, obviously, all of our levels in here that have continued to hold us up for this whole time. And then we're entering into a point where we're seeing breakdowns happening, moving averages breakdowns happening. And I would suspect Bitcoin would probably be doing it at the same time. And then we, of course, are having this dynamic over here in the stock market, right? So that hasn't happened. And frankly, I could still make the argument that it's not going to happen. And that a similar dynamic to what we are experiencing right now is what happens in Wyckoff accumulation. Probably sick of hearing that at this point. But that we actually are in like the spring phase happening in here. And where you're located right now is the point of extreme fear. And an example of that, like I'm sure you've looked over there on Twitter, you pretty much have all these major accounts screaming that XRP is going to break down and go to Goblin Town and die. And it reminds me exactly of what it was like for Binance coin back in 2023. And like a funny story that I've never shared with you guys, and especially for like long-term viewers of the channel, is that like every day I come in and I edit the thumbnail for what the video is going to be. And I kind of have a blueprint on what I'm going to use for the thumbnail. And I always open up the exact same file and just edit this old file that I have, which you can see here, XRP above 64 cents. And we're all like, but the funny thing about it is I'm using Binance Wyckoff accumulation in here every time I have to delete this part, and I do it every time. I delete the Binance Wyckoff accumulation off of the screen before I edit the thumbnail. But in this moment, of course, everybody's screaming that it's actually going to end up breaking down and it's going to be horror and Binance coin is dead. But, you know, barring that the lows hold and barring that the 200-day moving average holds, right, there's still like, from just a technical analysis perspective, right? And I get it. We've got a lot going on. You got a lot going on, you know, Bitcoin, crypto, US stock market, trade wars, all that stuff. I get it. Like you got to take into account all these pieces of information. And if we go breaking through the 200-day moving average, a lot of this probably changes very quickly. But just when I look at it from just a technical perspective of the things that have happened in here, it's like this is the spring phase, the ultimate fear phase of Wyckoff accumulation happening in here. And that, you know, we're just working it out out in here, and barring that the 200-day moving average holds, there's still a very real remote possibility that that is what's happening in here. And like we talk about crashing structures a lot, right? And even back in here, we're talking about the crashing structure. And what do you have? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Rolls back up to wave 4. Then you get one low, another new low, and then it pops back up and just accumulates, right? What do we have in here, right? You have your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rolls back up, one no low, one new low, and then now it's settling, right? So we just want to see settling. I think it's the best thing you can probably hope for the next several days, right? And probably till at least like April 9th or April 10th, because that's when a lot of this story could actually end up changing. And so as long as we can just keep ourselves together, we might make it out of this okay if things can turn themselves up by April 9th. And so the reason why April 9th is because that's when a lot of this stuff is supposed to go into effect, and a lot of like negotiations or changes to the story can happen by April 9th, which is next Wednesday. And like with Reuters posting right here saying, China is to impose a 34% tariff on all U.S. goods from April 10th, right? Why is that? Because it's like, hey, if you're going to go through with this on April 9th, guess what? We're coming back at you on April 10th. So this whole story could change drastically by April 9th, but we don't know. And then, things bounce and then we just kind of continue on our way humming along. But still, I totally think big tech is topped, and that this is a highly volatile situation we're in right now, because even here in pre-market with this announcement, we're already down another 1,400 points for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, coming off of being down 1,600 points yesterday. The NASDAQ closed down 5.5% yesterday. It's down 4% in pre-market. So not a time to be asleep at the wheel. And I think, in the coming days and through the weekend, the things to kind of be paying attention to are just to see, stabilizing happening throughout here, at least in cryptos, especially for things like XRP and for Bitcoin. And to just kind of be mindful of those break levels happening there for the 50-week moving average for Bitcoin and the 200-day moving average down there for XRP. Otherwise, things could pan out if we just kind of stay right here. Again, real shocked to see that we are holding up so exceptionally well. However, I don't want to tell you things of like, yeah, it's definitely going to the moon right now, because what's happening in the stock market, this is serious stuff right here. And right now, trying to figure out the dynamic on whether or not this thing is going to bounce and have some type of rotation in here. So like even with this thing, with where it's going to open down another 1,500 points. Technically speaking, that is a support level, be it a very wide one. There's still a lot of room in here. But even in the event of that, that is the identical discussion we're having in here, where there eventually becomes a moment like this, and then that's actually the true peak of the market. I know it feels absurd to say something like that in a moment like this, but that's what these discussions are in here too. That this is somewhat of an ABC happening in here that ends, right, with a moment like that happening in there. And then that's the actual conclusion of the market. And, in this moment of volatility, it definitely feels dumb saying that, but, that's the idea of it. The concerns with that, questioning that, of course, are the things that are happening with the Russell 2000. The things happening with the NASDAQ 100 technology sector and the things happening with big tech are actually exactly what you would expect. It's exactly what we theorized would be the case. The things that bring a little bit of fogginess to all of that is that mid caps and small caps, small stuff is certainly being impacted by this at the exact same time as well. So we'll look for things to just kind of stabilize themselves from here into the weekend. Story the same over there for XRP. Sideways is probably the best thing we could hope for right now. And so just let the stock market kind of do its thing. And if we can just kind of stay stabilized, that would be genuinely phenomenal. The path moving forward in this in regards to like rotations and what the Russell could look like and all of that. I'm really not sure if we're going to see anything more than just a retrace come out of the Russell 2000 at this point, especially with now seeing this VIX spike way above 25. It's now at 42, right? And a lot of those models that I was running with AI, I was also saying, we break these levels, we get above 25. Those are the stark things to be aware of. The unfortunate thing is this didn't happen as a natural market reaction, right? It's happening as a catalyst event. So if we just take it on the surface for what it is, to take out these levels, to have the VIX spike above 25, it really brings into the doubt of how much of a rotation could really end up happening in here. I think conceptually you could wrap your head around the idea that like a rotation needs to happen if this stuff sticks, because it means the way capital is allocated now is not the way it needs to be allocated moving forward, which means the capital has to rotate somewhere. However, still fuzzy. And so we'll have to kind of assess those things moving forward if crypto is able to actually hold these levels. And then, of course, we'll all be paying attention to see how much of this dynamic changes by April 9th. With Trump, things can change drastically. We all got to witness it in crypto just last month, right? Where there's appearance of everything completely breaking out. And then the story changed very quickly, and then it just reverted right back to where it was, right? Not going to try to sell you hopium on it to say that's going to end up being the case in here because we just don't know. But there's a lot of market dynamics taking place here in the market right now as we head into Friday, heading into a weekend where things are typically crazy on the weekends, but we get it in the middle of the week this time. But the coming days seem to, from what I'm reading, right? What I'm reading, what I'm listening to, and what I'm watching, is that, the big day is April 9th. That is why China is saying we're going to do the same thing April 10th if you do it. And then that poses the question, how long can this really go on for? And so we'll find that out, right? Again, no matter how you look at it, I do think big tech has topped. The big question is just how does the remainder of this play out in regards to the major indexes and in regards to the Russell having some type of retracement happening in here. And, we learned from Bitcoin back in 2021, right? Sometimes the retracements aren't very big. Sometimes they're kind of small. So we'll have to think about those things. And then we'll just have to see, does this thing actually end up having some type of ricochet moment happen from it when April 9th rolls around, and that this was just some wonky moment, right? I think we'll kind of pay attention to that and see how the candles respond. If they accept down here and then just stay down here, well, then I don't think we're having a ricochet moment. I think we're having kind of a prolonged period happening. So definitely a wild 36 hours. Somehow, some way, these cryptos are still holding themselves up, including XRP and Bitcoin. And I think all of us are probably in the same boat of being like, how is that still happening? And, wondering, is it coming? So be fluid, wild moment. We'll see how the day ends up going. We'll see if any other announcements come out and if there can be some type of reaction coming out of here. But pretty obvious. Market no likey. Yet still something we would have expected to show up right in here, which I've talked about on the channel and I've written about for months, that the breadth dynamic we were seeing would pretty much lead to a moment like that. I think the complication, though, is just how bad this Russell has been impacted. So we'll see how it reacts here in the coming days, and especially after April 9th. Otherwise, cryptos still just continue to stabilize. And as long as we do that, then we're okay. So throughout the weekend, of course, you could check out my newsletter at blockchainbacker.substack.com. It was an interesting take to have AI's perspective on a lot of these different ideas and what's happening with the stock market, which also does agree that tech has topped. But I think even on the charts now, we have the confirmation that it has. That includes a 48-minute audio recording. Now, normally when things kind of are ridiculously crazy, I can check in with you guys on the weekend and try to squeeze a video in. It's super early. But something that has made this week even harder than a normal week is that taxes are due in 11 days from right now. And this is my week of doing taxes. So I essentially do this, then I go work on taxes all day long. And I have the stock market acting like a fool in the background while I'm having to do all of my taxes to prepare to meet with my accountant this weekend. So I'll be with my accountant all weekend as we go through everything. And you'd think it would just be really easy, but like a lot of you guys, I do a lot of different trades here in the background, and we've got to document all of them. And that is annoying and time consuming, but part of the gig. So any wild stuff happens, you can probably catch me over there on Twitter or X at BCBacker. Otherwise, check out the newsletter, take a peek at what's going on in the markets now. You can, of course, check out bcbacker.com with over 40 videos and 11 hours of content teaching you how to set up your own charts and indicators within TradingView and CoinTrader Pro. There are links in the descriptions of all of my videos to the newsletter at blockchainbacker.substack.com and to bcbacker.com. Otherwise, have a wonderful weekend, guys. We'll see how this thing closes out the week. And if any kind of crazy crypto stuff happens throughout the weekend, I'll tweet about it. So, all right, that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice and I am not a financial advisor, but if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.